Welcome to week 3. This week we're looking at social hierarchy and dynasties. So, what have we looked at so far? Well, we've looked at how the geographic barriers isolate China. We've looked at how the deserts and mountains to the north and the west, the rivers, and the rainforest regions of the south and southeast, as well as the oceans, really segregated and isolated China from the rest of the world. We also looked at how these conditions of the fertile soils and the good climates around these areas really led to the emergence of civilization around these areas. So it was a really good place to settle down and start a family, or in this case, a dynasty. What is a dynasty or a dynasty? Tomato, tomato. Well, a dynasty or a dynasty is a line of hereditary rulers of a country. So you think of families who pass their throne on to their children and so on and so on. Like for the Queen at the moment, her throne came from her father, and that crown then came from his father, and so on and so on. In ancient China, it's a bit behind the times. They didn't really pass it on to their daughters. It went from father to son, or then father to next male living heir. So, sorry girls, we get, as usual, the ancient world doesn't really appreciate females, but they do now. So, ancient China covers around a 2,800 year period. It's very interesting that these are all of the dynasties during this time. So, we're going to look at why it's so choppy and changey. Like, some ruled for a couple of thousand years, but some only ruled for a few years, and we're going to look at why that is. The first thing you have to do today, there should be a little pencil icon, that's okay. There's a timeline activity in the hub of our class page, the file tile. That gets me every time. It gets you to organise different dynasties according to their dates. But remember, if you're looking at dates, BCE, we're counting down. So, 1,500, 1,000. And then when we go to AD, starts counting upwards. So remember that when you're doing your timeline. I'll be there to help you. I'll talk you through it later. Okay, so this is the title, the dynastic cycle. Dynastic cycle. So this is how a dynasty would start in ancient China. They've taken over from previous family who obviously wasn't doing a very good job. They've restored peace, and the land is redistributed amongst the people. So they might give land to a few nobles to start farming. Everything's good, peace and prosperity across the land. They start building new defensive systems and walls around their expanding region. They get a government, and it's generally working, but then the government sort of begins to neglect their duties, and the emperor obviously is not overseeing as well as he should. The officials begin to corrupt themselves, and they're not punished by the emperor. So remember, the emperor, actually, we haven't gone through that yet, but in most societies, the emperor is the top dog. He makes sure everything is going right or wrong. So, taxes are not being used to benefit the people. They're being used for royal luxuries. There's invasions from other places like the Mongolians, or even internal invasions from other areas of China, and eventually the other classes revolt and remove the people from power. So that's pretty much how a dynasty or a ruling family gets ousted after taking over and ruling for a period of years or 1,000 years. So each of these dynasties is what would have what is called a mandate of heaven. In China, they believed that the source of all authority for the emperor and their ruling families came from heaven. And if things began to happen, bad things, it meant that that family had lost out with heaven. They hadn't had a good relationship, or they'd done something wrong and heaven was punishing them. And that meant that the people would see that they'd lost that relationship with heaven, and that dynasty, that family, that emperor needed to be ousted. So when you're thinking, like, for example, there was in one instance a dynasty ruled during a big flood in China, and the people thought that because of this big flood, the heavens didn't like the ruling family anymore. So they ousted that dynasty for a new one who promised that they had the heavens mandate to rule. So this is how the mandate of heaven generally would work. Similar sort of thing, like as we just watched previously. A new dynasty comes in, it's peaceful and prosperous, and there's a good infrastructure. They're going and building things and giving land presents and protecting people. Generations go by, so fathers and sons and new families, and eventually this dynasty fails in its job. It starts treating people poorly, stops protecting people, starts using all their money, and then the people start to believe that they're losing the mandate of heaven through things like corruption, earthquakes and floods, revolts, invaders, or bandits. So eventually a new family will come in and say, we've got the mandate of heaven because this other family, they're having all these problems, and that old family gets ousted and this new family comes in and takes over. And it's that sort of cycle, and it happens for generations and generations. So that's how ancient China was ruled over this very large period of time. So, sorry, you have to write all this down in your book, but that's pretty much all the writing. And remember, these lessons go for the week, so you don't have to rush, just do it at your own pace. So ancient Chinese society was strictly organized. The emperor was the most important person, he was at the top. The people believed he was given the power to rule by heaven, called the mandate of heaven. This role was passed from father to son. People believed when the dynasty had problems, they had lost the support of the heavens. This often caused the removal of the emperor from power. Nobles and officials ensured that the emperor's orders were obeyed. Sometimes they were corrupt and took advantage of their power. Peasants made up 90% of the population, so that is a lot of people. They were the poorest class, but they were very respected because of their jobs that they did and the loyalty to the emperor that they had. Artisans made jewelry and pottery. They were respected, but they were seen for pretty much being for rich people. So, only rich people went to an artisan for a piece of jewelry or something. Merchants were the least respected because they were seen as somebody who didn't do anything. They just took, like, a merchant, somebody who sells something to another person. So it was seen that they would just take the goods that somebody else had made and passed it on and got the money for it. And the lowest class was the slaves in ancient China. These were people that had even been taken from conquests or had been sold by families to pay off debts. So the slaves were at the bottom of the food chain, as in most societies. So you need to write that down and draw this in your book. This is a little hierarchy. You don't have to do it like it's steps. This is just the best picture I could find. You could do it as a triangle, up to you, but you've got the emperor at the top, very similar to Egypt with your pharaoh. You've got your nobles, government officials, peasants. Peasants are all like they're quite respected. Unlike in other societies where they're like, peasants, they're down the bottom. Peasants were third place because they were seen as, keeping China going. Artisans were after the peasants because, not many people would use them. Merchants were down the bottom because nobody really liked them because they were just stealing and pawning off things that other people had made. And slaves right down the bottom. Okay, this is the next task for you to do. Once you've done all that previous stuff, you need to choose one of those following groups. And I want you to research and answer those 3 questions in your book. So describe the role they had in Chinese society. So you might have to look these up on the internet. Find a picture of a person from this group from that time if possible. Like there's a few pictures like this one here that you'll be able to find on the internet, which are from ancient times. And I want you to sort of describe what they look like or what they're doing. And, what does the picture show you? Like in different types of dress or what they're doing, what if they're seated, if they're, if they're a peasant, are they farming? And then the last one, why do you think your group ranks whatever on the social hierarchy? So, why do you think peasants rank second? Why do you think artisans rank third or fourth or up to you? Choose a group, answer those 3 questions. Next, I would have put a ClickView link on the hub. This is a little video watching task, so you get to watch through all these chapters. It goes for about 20 minutes. So you don't have to watch it all at once, but there is a question sheet, a worksheet that has also been put on the hub that you need to answer those questions. Don't worry too much if it's a discuss question, like, discuss in class, but just answer the questions that you can. But it's really good watching. It's quite short and sweet. And that's it. What a week's worth of work. I hope you've learnt something. Remember that you can always contact me via email or when we do our Zooms, but that's the work for the week. Watch this video, do the activities, the 2 worksheets that are on the hub, as well as watching those little clips. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and see you next week.